And we're recording now. So welcome back. Thank you so much, Professor Alessandro, for joining us again. Just for anybody watching that is not familiar with your work, just giving a little brief bio. Professor Alessandro Vinciarelli is a full professor at the University of Glasgow, where he's with both the School of Computing Science and the Institute of Neuroscience and Psychology. Professor Vinciarelli also sits on SubStrata's advisory board, and overall he has published more than 130 works, including one authored book and more than 35 journal articles. You know, as a leader in the field of nonverbal communication, I guess what I wanted to chat to you about now is nonverbal communication and social signals in general, are they underestimated or overestimated? And I guess the question came up because many times, I think mostly in business, in a business environment, we put like so much work and effort in creating presentations, projects, pitches, and I don't know if we pay just as much attention or care or detail into our social signals that we're sending when we're presenting or pitching those thoughts. What's your opinion on that?
Well, what is very much interesting is that the nonverbal part of communication has been studied since 2000 years ago. So Cicero had a very important rhetor in ancient Rome. Basically, in his very famous book, De Oratore, so how to speak, essentially, was giving advice on how to speak, not just what to say, but how to speak. How to present yourself in such a way that shows authority, that conveys authoritativeness, and so on. And then, let's say, for all along Western history, at least, there was attention to this, but it was always marginal. The focus has always been only on the verbal content, what to say, which makes sense because at the end, that's where our attention tends to be. The point is that, let's say, nonverbal communication is something that we perceive and analyze unconsciously. And it is also something that we display mostly unconsciously. So from that point of view, because it is not in our attention, unless we really decide to do so, it tends to be a little bit forgotten. However, the point is that it makes a total difference when it comes to a message you convey, right? So depending on the way you convey your message, the message can sound totally different. So from this point of view, especially in the last century, scientific attention started to focus on nonverbal communication and started to focus with the methodologies that we have now. And so it turned out that actually it plays a more and more important role. And this, especially in the last, I would say, 20 to 30 years, when we started to leave more and more the idea that we are entirely rational. And we started to realize that a lot of our life is also based on emotion, that also the right decision do not require only rationality, but also some form of affective involvement in the particular decision we are making, have brought much more attention to that. Because we realize that social signals, nonverbal communication, is about the affective part of our interaction, and so we have to pay attention to it if we want to be sure that communication works well, that we send our messages in the right way, that we are understood in the way we want to be understood, and not in another way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research about, and it always confirms the same, that we are emotional animals and that we we act on impulse, and even like for purchasing decisions, right? That we try to rationalize many things, but in reality, actually our decision is based on emotion or of what we feel, or like attachment to a brand or a celebrity or a particular product that we just love the look of it or the design. So it's not, even if we try to rationalize many of our business decisions or purchase decisions, then they can be many times tied to the nonverbal communication or the approach of the salesperson or the brand presenting it. So do you think somehow we've been trying to mask that the impact of like nonverbal communication on social signals?
Well, I think more than trying to mask it, we give it very much for granted, right? It's something that at the end we have in our equipment when we are bored. It is the most natural part, right? Often we talk about social signals as the point where nature meets culture. So nonverbal communication is a natural phenomenon. It is something that we share with the rest of the animal species that are on our planet. And what happens simply is that, what we are now is the end of a very long evolutionary processes. And we started in terms of communication with nonverbal behavior, right? It was very much important to figure out the emotions that others experience around us, the attitude that others have around us, because it was a matter of survival. So if someone close to you is afraid, you have to understand it quickly because it means there is a danger and you have yourself to react to the danger. And if someone is aggressive and can somewhat be a danger for you, you have to understand immediately that it is time to fight or fly, depending on the situation. And then along these evolutionary processes, at a certain point, we started to have rationality, we started to have language, etc. And this has progressively taken over in our attention, so in our conscious attention, right? So from this point of view, let's say it is a part that it is still there. Our attention tend to forget a little bit about, but it is one of the main drivers of all our unconscious life. So everything we do without really realizing. And it is very important to have that side, because if we have to think rationally and consciously about everything we do, then it will become very complicated to do anything. So let's say our brain invented this trick to have a little bit like two levels of activity. One is our conscious activities, and so we think of what we say, we listen to what other people say. And the other one is a little bit more unconscious, instinctual, if we want. And it is everything has to do with the nonverbal component, let's say, something that we can understand, but without thinking about, right? It's a kind of spontaneous and natural reaction to what we observe, what we sense, and what we feel. And it helps us to navigate social reality, social interactions, which are complex, are difficult, right? Without having to think too much. So in a sense, think about it. It's like when we drive our car, right? At the beginning, you really have to think about everything you do, moving the steering wheel, changing the gear, etc. Then you can do it without really thinking about. So somewhat from that point of view, is constantly there, is what drives us, is what allows us to interact with others effectively, but we don't really need to think about. So from that point of view, it's a very smart way that nature gave us to work properly and to interact properly with others.
Right. But I guess like my question is, can we cheat the system? So if I want to adjust it, or sometimes I'm trying to exude confidence in a business setting, or I'm presenting something, I might be super nervous, but I want to make sure my body language doesn't come across as super nervous. Like, is it possible to on the one hand control mine, and on the other hand also read the subtext or what's between the line of what's being said on the other side?
Yeah, through training, it is possible to get there. It is extremely difficult because imagine the large number of channels we have. I mentioned a few earlier, but there are our facial expression, there are the movements of our hands, there is our posture, there are the little movements that we do with all our body, there are the movements of the head, etc. So it requires an enormous effort, an enormous training to really control everything, or to do things that are extremely artificial, like trying to be really frozen, get a point where you control so much that you look artificial in any case. We have to consider one thing. At the end of the day, nonverbal communication is a bit of the external trace, the external manifestation of what we are inside. So most of the training essentially is about changing the way you are inside so that your nonverbal communication naturally goes with. One thing, however, that is possible to do, for example, for sure it is possible to avoid big mistakes, right? So interesting thing, one is when you talk with people, especially when you talk in front of an audience, well, you have to look at the audience, right? Imagine now if I say exactly the same thing like now, but I stay sitting like this, right? I can tell you exactly the same thing, the content will be exactly the same, but will I give the impression that I'm talking to you? I will give the impression that I'm thinking about someone else, so it will be totally different. So there are for sure mistakes that we can avoid. We can learn, for example, to smile and to try to smile, because the interesting thing is that it makes others feel at ease, but also it helps us to feel at ease, right? Because on the one hand, nonverbal communication is the trace of what we are inside. But on the other hand, there is a kind of a feedback loop, so that if I smile at the end, well, my brain understands that I can smile, that I can be happy about, right? So there is this interesting loop. So you see that the point is really to do at the same time, try to develop the inner states that helps you to have a proper nonverbal communication, and at the same time try to practice nonverbal communication that helps you to develop the appropriate inner state. So from this point of view, I would say the important thing is try to start by avoiding mistakes, right? And then, through training, it is possible to make sure that there is always a good fit between how you are inside, how you are outside, and that you can tune to the people you have around. Because that's another important thing. When we talk about nonverbal communication, we can focus on one individual, but we should never forget that it is something that we use in interaction. So it is always a game, a kind of exchange with the people we have around. So from that point of view, it's a very complex phenomenon, right? And there too, the point is really, let's start by avoiding the big mistakes. Let's try to look at the people we have. Let's try to stay open, not to give a sense of closure. Let's try to smile, etc. And you will see that through the various mechanisms, the feedback we will receive, it will be positive, and that will foster a virtuous cycle about getting the right signals.
Amazing. I mean, yeah, like that level of awareness is that the first, it's always good once you're aware of how you stand, how you move, even if you can, if you should act natural, like you said, so that you don't look like a robot or look frozen. Yeah. I think that stage of awareness in yourself and in others can be like really powerful tool to just start analyzing and seeing the benefits of that dynamic. Well, thank you so much for all these amazing insights, and I just look forward to chatting more and discussing more areas, because it's always so interesting to hear what you've got to say on the subject. So thank you very much, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you.